I'm joined today by Dan Heyman, who's a reporter for Public News Service. Dan, you were at the center of a controversy that sort of went viral a few days ago. You were actually arrested for asking a question, apparently at a volume and with a tone that not everybody liked, to Health Secretary Tom Price. It's been picked up by a number of news outlets, and you've been talking about what's going on. So first and foremost, let's talk about what's your typical beat as a reporter?
Well, I'm based in Charleston, West Virginia, and I've been with the Public News Service since 2009, and I've always covered West Virginia. We cover state by state. In that time, I've also covered other states, but I've always covered West Virginia.
So talk to us about the circumstances under which Tom Price was going to be, what you were going to be covering Tom Price and sort of what the event was and how the situation surfaced.
Well, I was working on a story about the impact of the Trump Care, the Republican health care proposal, on victims of domestic violence. I was already working on that story. And I had been, I've been trying to gather some information about this and saw that Secretary Price was going to be in town for something unrelated and was going to be at the Capitol. So I decided to go down and see if I could get him to answer a question about this, specifically whether or not domestic violence would be considered a pre-existing condition, because before the Affordable Care Act, before Obamacare, there were instances where battered women and men, there are probably a few who lost their health insurance because the domestic violence or the damage caused by domestic violence was a pre-existing condition. So I went down to try and get him to answer this question.
So you show up down there. Had he given some,
Right.
had he already spoken at the time when you approached to try to ask a question, or what were the circumstances?
No, he was entering the building and was on his way to a meeting that was closed to the public. Later on, he did, I'm told, answer four questions, although I didn't know about that. But he was just entering the building. It's a public space, and reporters do this all the time. As he was walking down the hall, I reached out my phone to him, had my phone recording, and I asked him, this question, and he didn't say anything. In that kind of situation, you're never sure whether the person you're trying to talk to doesn't want to say anything, or they're ignoring you, or whether maybe they just didn't hear you or you didn't hear their response. So I asked him a couple more times, and nobody pulled me back. Nobody told me, stay away from Secretary Price. Nobody, grabbed my arm. No one even really identified themselves as law enforcement until I was arrested, and I was pulled off, taken to a room at the Capitol in handcuffs, and they sent me away to end up in an orange jumpsuit.
Ultimately, you were arrested for willful disruption of state government processes. What exactly does that mean as far as you've investigated, and at what point did it become clear that it was sort of the volume and way in which you asked this question that caused this entire thing?
I really have no idea what that law means. I mean, my lawyer says that it may be unconstitutionally vague, and I think he may be right about that. It may have been in court. Basically, what this is the law that they use to, if somebody, for example, is in the gallery of the legislature during the legislative session or interrupts a meeting or something, and shouts out and tries to disrupt the meeting, that they can be arrested using this. It's a problematic statute. And the other thing, and this is something else my lawyer has pointed out that's kind of problematic, is what governmental process was I interrupting?
Mm.
I mean, the man was walking down a hallway. It wasn't like he was meeting with the governor in some kind of, during a thunderstorm or, it gives it a grandiosity that doesn't really make sense. And my suspicion is that the police, the Capitol Police who arrested me, I don't think there was any kind of an order come down from on high, keep the press away from this guy. There were some protesters there, and the Trump administration and Secretary Price has been very tightly controlling their public access regarding this healthcare legislation. They don't really like talking about it.
And Dan, just
And
to
my
get a few just before we move off of the specifics of the
Sure,
incident, number one,
sure.
were you sort of noticeably identifiable as a reporter? Like, did you have a press pass, for example, or something identifying public news service?
Right. I had a press pass on my chest on a lanyard, and I had a shirt on that said Public News Service. Now, because it had been raining, I also had a jacket on, so I don't think my shirt was visible. But when the police arrested me, I told them I was a reporter, and I told them that I was just doing my job, and
Yeah.
they arrested me anyway.
Did
So
you at any
it
point make
was
any
nice.
physical contact with the secretary?
No, no, I was never close enough to make physical contact with the secretary. And in fact, later on, he's done some interviews. He told a conservative talk show host that the talk show host asked him, was I, quote, menacing? And Price said, no, not really. He wasn't. I barely noticed him. And that kind of fits because, as I said, reporters do this all the time. I mean, if you Google Tom Price, talking to reporters in hallways, you could pull up, images of him answering questions, walking down a hallway in Washington, D.C.
And Dan, there's one quote I saw that says from some authority, I'm not sure exactly who it is that's quoted, that you were
Hmm.
because you were aggressively breaching personal space, that you were actually removed, quote, a couple of times from the area. Is that true? Had you already been removed before this incident?
No, I think that's actually in the criminal report, and I think that may be a case of the Capitol policeman trying to make this sound as good as possible.
Mm,
I was not removed from the hallway. This all took place in the hallway in one continuous, more or less, motion. And I was not removed from that hallway. We were all still in the same room.
yeah.
No one pulled me back. No one grabbed me by my arm. No one pulled me away. No one said, "Don't do that anymore." I think the only thing that we can assume they mean there is because I was trying to reach past who I assumed at the time was Secretary Price's staff, although in retrospect they may have been, some of them may have been Secret Service agents.
Yeah.
They were not identified as such, being, well, Secret Service agents. But I was trying to reach past them with my phone, and they were, pushing against me. And I was, I did that a few times, and then I tried to sort of jockey around the entourage
Sure.
to try and get a better angle on Secretary Price. But no, I was never removed.
Last thing, Dan, what are the repercussions for you legally now that you've been charged with willful disruption of state government processes?
Well, this is a misdemeanor, but it's a pretty stout one. I think the magistrate said a year. My lawyer said that really means 6 months. But there's a potential of 6 months in jail and I think a $500 fine. It was $5,000 bail,
Wow.
which my network put up. I think they put up 10% of that. But it's not to be underestimated. I'm not. I think most juries are going to stand with a free press.
Mm.
I mean, in this country, we really believe in reporters being able to do their jobs.
And
And
have
we
your
really
lawyers
believe,
said, here's how you should be thinking about the possibility of jail time? Have they sort of handicapped it for you, for lack of a better term?
Not really. I mean, he has said that we want to fight this. Some of that may be because we want to make a point, but also I think he feels like we've got a pretty good case.
Yeah.
But he hasn't said, if you go to jail, here's what you should do. It's a little bit concerning, the thought of going to jail for 6 months, but
I'll say.
I feel, yeah, but I do feel good that we have a strong case.
We've been speaking with Dan Hyman, the reporter from Public News Service, who was arrested for asking questions to Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price. Dan, we're going to be following what goes on, and I really appreciate you telling me about how it went down today.
Yeah, stay in touch. Hopefully, we'll have some news hopefully when they drop the charges.